If you ignore AIDS, it could be the death of you. So don't die of ignorance.
There are few illnesses in history that have carried such a stigma as AIDS and HIV. Human immunodeficiency virus and the subsequent illness it causes, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, are relatively recent additions to the diseases that have affected the human race, but have already claimed an estimated 36 million lives. The race to uncover the cause of a spate of illnesses first identified in otherwise healthy gay men, haemophiliacs, and Haitian immigrants soon uncovered a virus that could afflict anyone. In today's video, we will cover just exactly how the HIV virus operates, how the AIDS epidemic shaped a generation, and what more needs to be done to combat the disease. HIV is a retrovirus, meaning that the virus inserts a copy of its own RNA genome into the DNA of an infected cell, ultimately altering the genome of the cell. The host cell then makes copies of the virus. This hijacking makes HIV difficult for a host's immune system to combat, but this is half of the story. HIV also targets the very cells that fight the infection, namely the CD4 T cells. The initial infection of HIV will feel much like any other illness, often presenting flu-like symptoms. This will last as long as it takes for the immune system to somewhat combat the illness, though soon enough, the symptoms will fade. No further signs of infection will present itself for years and maybe even decades. During this time, however, the virus will destroy T cells, weakening a person's immune system to the point where even minor infections can prove deadly. It is at the point where the T cell level drops to less than 200 T cells per microliter that a person is considered to have AIDS. The healthy level for T cells is between 500 and 1500 per microliter, highlighting just how much damage the HIV infection can inflict. Once a person develops AIDS, they are incredibly susceptible to what are termed opportunistic infections. Often with HIV and AIDS, the infections tend to be illnesses such as salmonella, pneumonia, or fungal infections, as well as some forms of cancer. These opportunistic infections are what kill the sufferer of AIDS, usually in a small period of time. A person can be infected by HIV through certain bodily fluids, notably blood, semen, vaginal fluid, and breast milk. It cannot be spread through touch, through the air, or by saliva. Transmission via infected blood is by far the most effective way the illness spreads. Sharing needles, unprotected sex, particularly anal sex, and blood transfusions are the most common ways the disease spreads. The disease can also pass between mother and fetus in the utero, and through breast milk. It was during the 1980s that strange diagnoses were identified in otherwise healthy gay men. 5 cases of a rare pneumonia infection were identified in Los Angeles. Soon enough, other cities around the world were reporting similar outbreaks of obscure illnesses. One notable example were the high instances of Kaposi sarcoma, a type of cancer that causes lesions on the skin and usually a sign of a weakened immune system, in not only gay men but in haemophiliacs, heroin users, and Haitian immigrants. Whilst these groups were identified as the main affected groups, the disease was also prevalent amongst all groups. The race was on to identify the cause of the illness. Evidence had already presented itself as to how the disease was able to spread. It was identified as able to spread through intercourse, as it had passed through an infected person and their partner, and through blood transfusions due to the number of haemophiliacs affected. In 1983, it was the French team of Francois Barry-Senosi and Luc Montagnier who believed that a virus was responsible. This was because both fungal and bacterial antigens were screened for when blood was donated, but not for viruses. They were able to discover a retrovirus in patients with swollen lymph glands that attacked lymphocytes, a kind of blood cell that is very important to the body's immune system. They named their discovery Lymphodemopathy associated virus. In 1984, American Dr. Robert Gallo and his team published a number of reports in what they had discovered about the retrovirus we now know as HIV, and just how the virus came to infect humans was soon identified. In 1985, researchers at Harvard and at the New England Regional Primate Research Center identified a similar immunodeficiency illness in macaque monkeys. Other non-human primates were studied until it was discovered that chimpanzees were infected with a similar virus to HIV. It was therefore hypothesized that the infection occurred between human and chimpanzees, in what was dubbed the cut-hunter hypothesis. It is believed that a hunter of bushmeat, that is meat from a chimpanzee, may have had infected blood enter an open wound or cut. From there, the virus was able to spread to others. It is now believed that the virus originated somewhere in the Congo region and that it spread to humans in the early 1900s. At this time, the Belgian colonial authorities occupied the Congo Basin. It is thought that the disease was able to spread via intercourse with the sex workers present at the major trading posts, and through needles being reused. At the time, needles would have only been washed in alcohol. In the 1960s, a number of Haitian professionals moved to the region when Belgian Congo gained independence in order to help rebuild the country. It is thought that one of these professionals may have become infected with HIV and brought it to the Americas. From there, it is believed that the unscrupulous and unsanitary blood plasma donation centers that sold blood to the United States unknowingly led to infections. To demonstrate how far the HIV virus had spread, it was likely the cause of death of a man in St. Louis in 1969, as well as a Norwegian sailor who died in 1976. The virus then silently spread around the world until by the 1980s it became clear of its deadly impact. It is often incorrectly stated that Patient Zero in the United States was a Canadian air steward named Gaetan Dugas. In a 1984 study, Dugas was identified for his role in a cluster of infections in California, being labelled in the study as Patient O, the O representing out of state. The study sought to identify the sexual partners of a number of gay men in California as to trace how they had been infected. Dugas would be given the moniker Patient Zero following the release of the book titled "And the Band Played On: Politics, People, and the AIDS Epidemic." In this book, Dugas was portrayed as the reason for the AIDS epidemic in the United States, painted as a villain of the story. Dugas, however, was at the center of the web of encounters, as he had been able to provide details of many of his sexual partners, as opposed to the others who were only able to provide a handful at best. In 2016, analysis of blood from the time identified that Dugas was not the originator of the virus, but rather had been infected by the strain that was present already in the state. Dugas would die on the 30th of March 1984, aged only 32, from AIDS-related kidney failure. HIV and AIDS soon became tied directly to being a homosexual man, with Kaposi sarcoma being labelled as the gay cancer. In fact, before HIV and AIDS were formally identified, the illness was given the name GRID, which stood for Gay-Related Immune Deficiency due to some of the first cases being uncovered in gay men. It is important to note that whilst the virus can and does infect anyone, certain groups are more at risk. Gay men engaging in unprotected intercourse are at a higher risk of contracting the virus. The virus is able to spread quickly as rectal tissues provide little obstacle for the virus to pass through, and rectal tissues contain high amounts of CD4 T cells, the very cells that HIV targets for infection. A link in the description will be available for those who wish to read more about the higher risks of infection amongst gay men. Whilst HIV and AIDS were seen as a gay illness, in Uganda this was not the case. What was termed Slim Jim as a result of the weight loss associated with the illness, the virus spread quickly through heterosexual intercourse and from mother to fetus. The virus was soon seen by some as the disease that punished immoral behaviours, whether that be homosexuality, promiscuity, or drug use. Those who contracted the disease were often shunned, discriminated against, or subject to violence. This was only compounded by the discrimination experienced by the LGBT community, who at the time were fighting for civil rights and recognition under the law. It was only when cases such as Ryan White became known did perception start to change. Ryan was a haemophiliac who contracted the virus following a blood transfusion when he was just 13 years old. Ryan was expelled from his school despite posing no threat to his classmates. Ryan was seen by some as the innocent victim of the AIDS epidemic, as opposed to gay men or drug users who were by implication the guilty victims. Such comments were flatly rejected by Ryan and his family, with Ryan stating, "I'm just like everyone else with AIDS, no matter how I got it." The fight to obtain assistance and respect during the AIDS crisis was waged by a number of bodies. Larry Kramer and 7 others co-founded Gay Men's Health Crisis in 1982, one of the first organizations to raise money for research of the virus. In January of 1983, Ward 86 opened as the world's first dedicated outpatient clinic for people with AIDS. Ward 86 was located at San Francisco General Hospital. It provided a holistic, compassionate and dignified approach that set the standard for treatment. It was not until 1985 that President Ronald Reagan established a presidential commission into combating the AIDS crisis, and after years of inaction. In 1987, Princess Diana attended the opening of the UK's first specialist HIV and AIDS unit at London's Middlesex Hospital. At a time where people were being burned out of their homes and shunned by the world, Diana was eager to prove that those suffering with HIV and AIDS posed no threat and deserved compassion. Many AIDS patients and activists would protest and raise awareness by what were termed die-ins. Activists would lay down in the street, often holding placards in the shape of gravestones stating how they might die. Whether from a lack of empathy, or that they received the placebo drugs in a trial, or that the price of the retroviral drugs were prohibitively expensive. The idea was to force society to realize what it truly meant to have to remove the corpses of so many AIDS patients, and to bring to light what more needed to be done. As of now, HIV/AIDS is no longer a death sentence, though this largely depends on where you happen to live. The development of HAART, or highly effective antiretroviral therapy, means that a person's immune system can stop HIV from replicating, avoiding the final stages of AIDS ever developing. Messaging and awareness as to the dangers of the virus, such as the one from the start of this video, emphasize just how anyone could be affected by the illness. In Sub-Saharan Africa, millions live with HIV, with AIDS being one of the leading causes of death in the region. Around 35 to 40 million people currently live with HIV, but many also live with a stigma because of their condition. In the various videos we have made about the illnesses that have plagued humanity, it is often the case that stigmatization and a lack of compassion prevent treatment. Such is the case with HIV and AIDS, where communities were declared morally incompatible and posed a medical danger to those not afflicted. Whilst our understanding as to how the disease spreads means we are able to better prevent it, and as our understanding grows as to treatments, we may work towards a world where the impact of HIV is diminished considerably. But what we must never diminish is our compassion towards our fellow humans.